But again, I'm really trying to figure out who you are, because I want to know if you are sort of a diehard evangelical who is trying to stand on the parapet, stand on the watchtower, warning the sheep in the fold of a danger coming in from the outside. I mean, I want to get a sense of who you are so that I have an idea of who I'm talking to.
I see the smoke of postmodernism rolling in, and I'm turning on the fan. That's what I'm doing. I'm turning the lights on. The lights have been turned out by the postmodernism. I'm flipping them on so people could see what's going on.
Okay.
My concern is truth.
Did someone abuse you with a book of Foucault? I want to know your lived experience here. I want to know from where the rage comes. Did a bunch of praxis people burn down your little local church and crucify your sainted Sunday school teacher? Where is this rage coming from?
Do you remember when I said I wanted to be William Lane Craig?
Oh,
do you remember when I said that's what I wanted to do? Remember I said that? Well, It wasn't ambition. It wasn't that I wanted to be. It said I wanted to be the apologist. And at the time, I had a nagging question in my head, which is this: in 2006, what would it mean if by the time I have a PhD, which will be 10 years from whenever I start my degree, or 12 years, we're all arguing about the exact same things we're arguing about right now?
Oh.
That would mean apologetics doesn't work, or the conversation hasn't moved, and that's very unlikely. I didn't understand what apologetics was or what it would look like 15 years. I was out of the game. I told a pastor in 2016, I was like, that dream is dead. I no longer want to do that. I'm happy building cabinets. And then when I got into politics, I said, I'm even happier now that I'm in politics doing policy. I no longer need to build cabinets. It's very cold here. Carrying things in and out at 40 degrees below is not, it's much better to just write policy. That's easy. I can research. That's better. I was out of the game, man. And then when the grievance study affair woke me from my slumber, got me up and cracked my knuckles and said, oh, this stuff again. And
so
what I care about is
the grievance study really bothered you enough to do what you've done?
I care about truth.
Okay.
And I hate intellectual bullies.
Okay.
I hate people who make it their goal to epistemologically disempower people and to win arguments by pulling the rug of authority out from other people and say, well, you can't even have this discussion, so you'll just have to let me handle it. And then disempower them within the conversation using jargon and terminology and concepts. And then whenever they get caught, say, well, my point is more subtle than that. Have you read blah, blah, blah? It's this thing that I hate. When someone says, I'm not sure I agree with consubstantiation. I'm more of a transubstantiation guy myself. And they respond and say, oh, have you read chapter 14, paragraph 7 of the Summa Contra Gentiles in the original Latin? And you go, well, I haven't. Well, I don't think you're qualified to talk about this. And it's like, or when they go, or with someone who's an agnostic or an atheist says, I'm not sure I believe in Christ. And they go, oh, have you read the 14th manuscript of Timothy in the original Greek? And they're like, no. Oh, well, I'm not sure you're really qualified to have this conversation with me. And it's just like, that attitude of getting caught, saying what they really believe and having it be rejected by people who say, no, I just don't believe you. And then trying to tear them down by embarrassing them in the conversation, by appealing. This, I hate more than anything else. That's one. Two, I want the truth. I could be wrong, and I'm okay with being wrong, but I want the truth. And I hate nothing more than people who say, well, what we're doing is the truth and the truth. And then they use postmodern ideas where they apply the postmodernism to dissolve your views and
to rust your sword,
to rust your sword, to crack apart your thing. And then they arbitrarily exempt their views from the same analysis.
Yeah.
We don't need a double standard here, John Caputo. one standard will do just fine. And if we're going to deconstruct binaries, I can think of no better binary to be deconstructing than the binary between conditional and unconditional, because that's a wonderful little binary that's ripe for deconstruction, John.
Hi, this is Paul, and I have Wokal Distance on me today. He has a mid 5-figure Twitter account. And did you get on Shenvi's graph that he released today? Are you on there too?
Yeah.
Okay.
I am.
So that puts you sort of in the evangelical Twitter sphere, I suppose. I don't know when I think you've been on Benjamin Boyce's channel.
Yes.
And I think I saw that you did a video with Benjamin and James Lindsay.
Yes. Yep.
And so, but I really, and I've obviously read some of your tweets, and I sort of have an idea of your valence, but sort of, I don't know if you've watched any or have any familiarity with my YouTube channel at all, what I'm doing with it.
Yeah, I've watched. So I've seen some of your stuff with Jonathan Piaget.
Okay.
I've seen some of your stuff with, there's a young guy who's just started, I forget his name at the moment, but he's just started coming on. I've seen a lot of your work interacting with Jordan Peterson. So I have, I've seen some of the Twitter interactions with Bethel McGrew.
Yes.
Esther O'Reilly. So
yeah.
I'm aware of sort of the angle that you're coming in at things on.
Okay. Well, you'll have plenty of chance to ask me questions if you want to, but I'm going to begin with you. You work mostly under a pseudonym. Why?
Well, so what happened is I was working in politics. So we'll step back and we'll do my journey a little bit so you could see kind of where I came from.
Perfect.
Back in the day, in about 2002, I went to attend a small, tiny little Bible school, the Eston College in Eston, Saskatchewan. And it was Full Gospel Bible Institute at the time. And I went and I did that, and I got my degree in biblical studies, studying theology and the Bible. I finished up, took a year off, and then went into philosophy. With kind of the goal at the time of thinking, I want to be like Bill Craig, like William Lane Craig, or Alvin Plantinga. That was kind of the goal at that time. So I did that for a while, and then in 2011, William Lane Craig came to my province and did a debate with Dr. Williamson at the University of Saskatchewan. And I got up and asked a question of Dr. Williamson about free will. This was in 2011. So I hit him on a point about how he wanted to use, very technically speaking, we don't need to get into this, but I asked him a question. He had said that he had a notion of free will based in speech acts, and I hit him on that point. And afterward, Bill Craig came and was talking after. He's like, "That was a good question." I was like, "Oh, thanks. I appreciate that." I actually still have the audio for this. And so we were sitting and chatting, audio of the question, not of the after conversation. And I said to him at the time, I said, "I'd like to do your job." And he says, "Well, it's open." He's like, "There's lots of philosophy professors around." So I said, "Okay." I went around, and I that was in 2011. So by the time 2016 had rolled around, I had left the university. I had left the academy for personal reasons that disallowed me from continuing. Basically, for reasons I don't want to get into too much, because it would take too long. I had to take a hiatus and start, and during my time away from university, financial reasons, I had to start a career, and I did that. And so I ended up working in politics. So I did that for about 4 years. And while I was
level of politics, I mean, elected official or staffer?
Yes, provincial. I worked as a staffer for a provincial government.
Okay.
So I was like, okay. So I did that. And while I was doing that, I was in my office one day, and the grievance studies affair popped up on my computer as I was searching the news, because you're in politics, you're keeping track of the news, and I lost it in my office. And the other staff was like, "What's going on?" I was just like, "Just read this. This is amazing." There was the dog park paper and the feminine and all the stuff that goes with that. So I had a laugh about this because I knew about the Sokal hoax from back in the 90s when the physicist Alan Sokal thought that the postmodern journals were kind of nonsense. So he wrote a bunch of nonsense and very complicated language and sent it in. It didn't mean anything and they published it. So I thought that was pretty good. And so it was James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, and I had a tiny little Twitter account at that time, which is now gone, which had maybe a couple hundred followers. And I connected with James Lindsay and I said, hey, that was pretty funny that you guys did that. And he's like, yeah, well, it's postmodernism. And that like went ding, 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 ding in my head. And I was like, oh, I know what that is. Because back when I was in Bible school, you know what all the rage was?
Brian McLaren.
The Story We Find Ourselves In by Brian D. McLaren.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. We have Adventures in Missing the Point by Brian McLaren and Tony Campolo. Oh wait, we have more. But wait, there's more. The Secret Message of Jesus by Brian McLaren. That was all the rage. That was it. All that stuff.
Well, you're talking 2016. I mean, McLaren
was 20. That's in 20. He showed up in 1997.
Yeah.
With a book called. Let me see if I can just pull it up here because I want to get the exact title correct.
I own it. I own a bunch of his early books. I mean, he in many ways exemplifies the emergent movement.
Oh, I call him the dawn of the emergent movement. It's more ready than you realize. Evangelism in the postmodern matrix. That was the first shot across the bow. I think it was 1997, right? Yep. So he shows up. That's the first accessible. If you want to go back, probably the first book is John D. Caputo's Radical Hermeneutics, and I think it's 1983 or 1987. It's one of those 2 years. Let's find out, just so we can make sure. So McLaren is early 2000s, late 90s is when he starts. He doesn't really hit until I would say 2001. That's when he really what's the way to put this? Yeah, it's January 22nd, 1988 is what Amazon has here for Radical Hermeneutics. The early 2000s is Brian McLaren's heyday. That's him, that's Tony Jones. Shortly after there, Rob Bell emerges from the same fountain of emergent. Remember that imprint, the YS imprint from Zondervan? They were pumping that stuff out where the book covers looked like album covers.
Well, we should talk about that movement because I'm older than you. So I was ordained in 91 and I was overseas until 97. And then I came back to North America into a parish ministry in 97, was immediately initiated into the seeker movement because the Christian Reformed Church Home Missions was pushing that and my classis was pushing that. So I took two trips out to Willow Creek. I took one trip out to Saddleback in Southern California. So I was, when I got back to North America, I was immediately initiated into the seeker movement and all of that. And very quickly began to see the emergent movement coming of those who did not feel that the seeker movement was going to do what it imagined it could do, which was, one of the trips when I visited Willow Creek, they had their Axis service, which of course, Willow Creek was really sort of for the boomers. And so their Axis service was for the busters. And, Willow basically thought they could apply their business methodologies to religion and really get the machine in straight and just keep pumping world-changing disciples of Jesus Christ and create safe space for a dangerous message, which has turned out to be very ironic a few decades later. Mm-hmm. And so the emergent movement was really a pushback on that. And of course, the emergent movement was all about authenticity. And it's important. In a recent video, I really annoyed a bunch of people when I noted that Nadia Bolz-Weber and Mark Driscoll come out of the same movement and actually have a tremendous amount in common.
They're photo negatives.
They are. That's exactly what they are. They're photo negatives. Mm-hmm. And that of course ticked a whole bunch of people off, because if you listen to the rise and fall of Mars Hill on Christianity Today, it's sort of their attempt to wipe that spot out of evangelicalism that is Mark Driscoll, but they're trying to wipe it sort of by leaning into the other half of the emergent, which was actually the emergent movement shattered into, I mean, because the seeker movement is still there and going fairly well in many places, but the emergent, of course, you have Nadia Bolz-Weber, who now is the what title did they give her in her Lutheran denomination? They basically told her she is the model for what that particular mainline Lutheran denomination wants to offer to the world. And of course, Mark Driscoll, who went young, restless, and reformed, which is another branch of the emergent movement. It's important to remember that Rob Bell and Mark Driscoll both gave their names, their churches, the same name. They were also born within a couple of months from each other.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, Rob Bell's big church plant was no other place but Grand Rapids, Michigan. And Young, Restless, and Reformed is making their impact with Acts 29 and Driscoll up in Seattle, Washington. So this is a big story. Now, also coming out of the emergent movement, I think, is also what I call the neo-sacramentalists, who are now sort of in the Jonathan Peugeot, many people who are Orthodox curious. So, okay, so let's dive back into your story. What nerve did this hit for you, and why?
I'm trying to find something here. Let's see if I can find. I always try to ground my sources by reading the exact paper. Okay. But I don't have the precise paper with me in front of me, so you'll have to trust me a little bit.
I'm a very trusting sort of person. Okay. Trust me. Oh, that's interesting.
This is the book. This was my tabula rasa. This was our tabula rasa when McLaren started showing up. So we have to tell a little bit of a story, because McLaren is using the postmodernism. McLaren is postmodern. He wrote an article. I would quote it if I had it in front of me, and I may go looking for all of these things after, so you can stick them in the description so people see I'm not lying. Where he talks about how postmodernism is it's just a great idea that goes on our palette of ideas, the way we have enlightenment here, and we have rationality here, and we have romanticism here. How do we just put postmodernism here? It's one of the colors that we paint with now. No,
that doesn't. Well, my assertion is that postmodern is sort of like COVID. We all got it. It's sort of like Protestantism. I mean, it's one of these major movements that went through the culture that anything that comes after it has either has sort of adapted its code to their system, has antibodies against it, or is promoting it. It's sort of the way
everything is either has it or reacts to it.
Yeah.
That's right. This is correct. We are living in postmodernism. Hooray! Yay!
Well, I want to know why are you so reactive to it?
We are living in postmodernism.
Okay.
But there's a but. We have to talk about a little bit about other people first. Okay. About the emergent church before we can get into the postmodernism proper. We have to get our way into it. So
okay.
What happened was when I was learning about the postmodernism, I read it. And I immediately thought of the philosophical postmodernism. This is nonsense. And so, just like that, this is nonsense. Very seriously, I was very seriously annoyed. I wasn't like, oh, that's silly. We'll just go on without that. I was like, no, this is bad. And boy, is it being picked up by an awful lot of people. Boy, wow, we should be aware of this. So to be honest with you, by about 2014, I thought maybe it had died. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine where I said, yeah, it's not getting taught anymore. That was somewhat true. It was no longer being taught in analytic philosophy, was no longer focused on defeating postmodernism. It had spread to literally every other area of the academy and through all of culture. So I thought, well, if it's dying in philosophy, it'll soon die everywhere else. I was wrong about that. What had happened is that there was a temporary moment where people were not focused on it or commenting on it because it wasn't at the time a big deal in analytic philosophy. But everywhere else in the culture it was coming, and now all of the young people who have come up are very interested in postmodernism. Robin Debroff, a young philosopher from Yale, who's transgender, includes quotes from philosophers like Michael Foucault at the beginning of the articles that get published, that Robin publishes. So this is now working its way in through analytic philosophy. They have adopted a postmodern worldview and a postmodern way of thinking. So when the postmodernism showed up, I was just like, oh, this is going to end in complete nihilism and the death of truth. The problem is all the guys who were speaking about it, and I include in this criticism with great love and respect the man who may have saved my faith, William Lane Craig. In my criticism here, I think they did not fully understand what the postmodernism does and how it functions. I call it the postmodernism. That is the philosophical ideas of Foucault and Derrida, to a lesser extent Baudrillard, who was more aware of postmodernism, was saying, well, now what? What happens? What's going on? He was describing the situation. Foucault and Derrida were, in my estimation, kind of building and pushing out the postmodern philosophical ideas and the ideas that would lead to postmodernism. So, and I said, oh, this is going to destroy everything it touches. And then as I was going through, life happens. I had to get out of the academy for a while, and I kind of forgot about it until I saw the grievance studies. And I started reading back through it, and I was like, oh man, this stuff is everywhere. They don't quote Foucault and Derrida directly, but they quote the people who were quoting Foucault and Derrida directly. So they're no longer quoting Foucault and Derrida, they'll quote like Judith Butler. Or they'll quote Sandra Harding. Or they'll quote whoever. So that's what's happening right now, is so people were looking around at this stuff and being like, they were like, well, what do we do? How do we handle this? What are we supposed to do? Because they sense something is wrong. They feel something is crumbling. They can feel the sands of how can I say, they can feel the foundation begin to twist and crack and shake.
Okay, who's they?
I think everyday normal people. I think in a lot of cases, this is Christians.
Okay.
Who are I think in a lot of cases, it's Christians who are hold on, I found a something that we needed here. Give me just 1 second. I do have something that I absolutely need. We'll come back to it. So
Okay.
so people can feel the shifting sands of their world, of their epistemology, of their understanding of the world being shaken and cracking, but they can't quite point at it. They feel something is going wrong, but they're like, well, they try to find it. What is it? Where is it going? And they can't point at it. And what the Grievance Study Affair did is show that they're using postmodernism. And if you know anything about postmodernism, which we will discuss, there is a reason why it is so very, very difficult to pin down. It can be absolutely impossible to pin down by design, I think, the way that the philosophers operate. So that's where I showed up. And so after I left my job, because I had a it was 2020, just the beginning of 2020.
Okay.
And so I had already been writing back and forth with James for a couple of years about this, and I started writing, and he had made a comment to me that you explain this stuff really, really well. He's like, you always have like these nice little phrases to encapsulate things. I was like, sure. So when we started writing, I was like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell people what's going on. I hesitate to use this term, but my gift is teaching. To take things, to break them down, to make them simple, to put them in the hands of people so they can grasp them and understand them.
Okay.
And so that's what I do. I teach about it. So we can go now from wherever we want. We can head into the postmodernism. We can talk about why it does what it does, how it does what it does. We could talk about how it gets into Christianity, what it's going to do to Christianity, why it's going to do that, wherever you want to go from here.
Okay. Well, I want to begin because I don't think YouTube needs another video that says postmodernity is bad and is destroying everything, including the Christian church. There are plenty of videos on YouTube that are doing that. And almost anyone who is watching my channel will have seen their share of these videos, either favorably, appreciatively, or hostilely. So I don't know that that's ground we need to tread. I think we'll certainly talk about it, but my question for you is, why were you reactive to this while many, many people are not?
What do you mean reactive?
Oh my goodness, that's postmodernity. That's bad. Well, why did you have that reaction?
Oh, because postmodernism eats everything it touches.
Okay,
and it
how do you know
everything.
that? Did you have an experience with that?
Ah, okay. Okay, I see what you're asking. So we'll talk about why I think this, why other people don't think this. But I think the thing to understand, the thing to really nail down is that postmodernism isn't like a light switch that goes on, off. That's not how it operates. It doesn't work that way. It's more like, people talk about it like an acid, and people picture the thing if you pour it on and it like erodes away. That's also a bad analogy. A better analogy is it's like water on iron. It makes it rust.
Okay.
And that takes time. It oxidizes it.
Okay.
Okay. That's the better analogy.
Okay.
So when I saw it, what I did is I had said,
where were you and when were you when you saw it and had this realization?
Oh, I can point to
you didn't come out of your mother's womb talking about postmodernity. I mean,
there's two
happened.
spots.
Okay.
First was when I read Brian McLaren's A Generous Orthodoxy.
Okay.
And then the second time was when James asked me, was when I saw the Evangelical Post-Colonial Reader.
Oh, that's an
edited
interesting title. I haven't heard.
Yeah.
I don't have in my library.
Yeah, so it's got Victor Frank. I think it's Frankie. I have to remember his name.
Frank
he helped.
Schaeffer.
Nope, not Frank Schaeffer. It's hold on a second. Let's get the book. John R. Frankie, who wrote Beyond Foundationalism with Stanley Grenz, is in there. Megan DeFranza, who was a part of Q Christian, wrote for that. Brian McLaren has an intro piece to it.
Is this a book or a journal?
I'll find it for you. Give me a second. I believe it was a published academic journal. I'll find you a link to it. Evangelical Post-Colonial Conversations by IVP Press.
Oh, okay.
And it's got global awakenings in theology and praxis.
Yeah. Well, and now so this might strike you as humorous. And when I was having so in order to become ordained in the Christian Reformed Church, there's certainly the academic component, which you do at Calvin Seminary, but then you have to pass an interview with the Board of Trustees in order to be recommended for candidacy. And somehow for me, the rumor among at least some in the Board of Trustees was that I was a little too favorably inclined to liberation theology. So I got asked a lot of questions about that. So praxis. I mean, this stuff has been rolling around various areas of the church beyond evangelicalism for quite a while, and
go back to the 70s if you wanted.
Yeah, has a variety of iterations. But again, I'm really trying to figure out who you are, because I want to know if you are sort of a diehard evangelical who is trying to stand on the parapet, stand on the watchtower, warning the sheep in the fold of a danger coming in from the outside. I mean, I want to get a sense of who you are so that I have an idea of who I'm talking to.
I see the smoke of postmodernism rolling in, and I'm turning on the fan. That's what I'm doing. I'm turning the lights on. The lights have been turned out by the postmodernism. I'm flipping them on so people could see what's going on.
Okay.
My concern is truth.
Did someone abuse you with a book of Foucault? I want to know your lived experience here. I want to know from where the rage comes. Did someone did a bunch of praxis people burn down your little local church and crucify your sainted Sunday school teacher? Where is this rage coming from?
Do you remember when I said I wanted to be William Lane Craig?
Oh,
do you remember when I said that's what I wanted to do? Remember I said that? Well,
It
wasn't ambition. It wasn't that I wanted to be. It said I wanted to be the apologist. And at the time, I had a nagging question in my head, which is this: in 2006, what would it mean if by the time I have a PhD, which will be 10 years from whenever I start my degree, or 12 years, we're all arguing about the exact same things we're arguing about right now?
Oh.
That would mean apologetics doesn't work, or the conversation hasn't moved, and that's very unlikely. I didn't understand what apologetics was or what it would look like 15 years. I was out of the game. I told a pastor in 2016, I was like, that dream is dead. I no longer want to do that. I'm happy building cabinets. And then when I got into politics, I said, I'm even happier now that I'm in politics doing policy. I no longer need to build cabinets. It's very cold here. Carrying things in and out at 40 degrees below is not, it's much better to just write policy. That's easy. I can research. That's better. I was out of the game, man. And then when the grievance study affair woke me from my slumber, got me up and cracked my knuckles and said, oh, this stuff again. And
so
what I care about is
the grievance study really bothered you enough to do what you've done?
I care about truth.
Okay.
And I hate intellectual bullies.
Okay.
I hate people who make it their goal to epistemologically disempower people and to win arguments by pulling the rug of authority out from other people and say, well, you can't even have this discussion, so you'll just have to let me handle it. And then disempower them within the conversation using jargon and terminology and concepts. And then whenever they get caught, say, well, my point is more subtle than that. Have you read blah, blah, blah? It's this thing that I hate. When someone says, I'm not sure I agree with consubstantiation. I'm more of a transubstantiation guy myself. And they respond and say, oh, Have you read chapter 14, paragraph 7 of the Summa Contra Gentiles in the original Latin? And you go, well, I haven't. Well, I don't think you're qualified to talk about this. And it's like, or when they go, or with someone who's an agnostic or an atheist says, I'm not sure I believe in Christ. And they go, oh, have you read the 14th manuscript of Timothy in the original Greek? And they're like, no. Oh, well, I'm not sure you're really qualified to have this conversation with me. And it's just like that attitude of getting called, getting caught, saying what they really believe and having it be rejected by people who say, no, I just don't believe you. And then trying to tear them down by embarrassing them in the conversation, by appealing. This I hate more than anything else. That's one. Two, I want the truth. I could be wrong, and I'm okay with being wrong, but I want the truth. And I hate nothing more than people who say, well, what we're doing is the truth and the truth. And then they use postmodern ideas where they apply the postmodernism to dissolve your views,
to
and
rust
then
it, to rust your sword,
to
let's say.
rust your sword, to crack apart your thing. And then they arbitrarily exempt their views from the same analysis. We don't need a double standard here, John Caputo. One standard will do just fine. And if we're going to deconstruct binaries, I can think of no better binary to be deconstructing than the binary between conditional and unconditional, because that's a wonderful little binary that's ripe for deconstruction, John.
Okay. Well, now we're getting somewhere. Now
I see the point.
Now I think I'm starting to understand you, because so here's part of the problem with the way the conversation is going now. That part of what social media exploits is the NPC nature of human beings. And now that's not a bug, it's a feature, because our capacity to imitate is basically the way we can cooperate in order to compete. Let's say, if you want to take Brett Weinstein stuff.
Sure.
So human beings have an incredible capacity to not only absorb, but to perpetuate what we hear. And if we are absorbing and perpetuating good things, true things, beautiful things, that's an enormously powerful thing, because you can create communities and civilizations upon that truth and goodness and beauty. If, however, you get some other things into the system that everyone starts NPCing about, well, then you then you have a problem. And part of what I think we're seeing, and this is why I resist, it's very easy for people on both sides, because now we've sort of got the woke and the anti-woke going, and they both got considerable NPCs going in order to fight this fight. The problem with being an NPC is exactly what you described, because in a sense, so we have seeker and then emergent, and we keep getting these dialectics because of this, basically the structural feature of humanity, that we sort of ramp up and then one side sort of gets the other hand. And what you just described is sort of an implicit elitism that disqualifies the people down below from actually participating. And in fact, I would say is in many ways very unchristian, because it implicitly robs all of the people who are simply participating in these structures from actually being image bearers of God, who are capable of knowing the truth, having an encounter with the truth, and all of that too. So that's part of why, even though, because of my interest in Jordan Peterson and my critique of where I saw my own denomination going and where I saw conversations going, even though I was expected to be a good progressive NPC, I stopped saying what was supposed to be said, which of course caused everybody else in the choir to look at me and say, no, and so, because I want to say, hey, wait a minute, let's let's stop with the NPCing a minute and maybe do some actual conversation with each other.
Yeah.
And let's participate instead of just being a part of a choir.
Yeah. What happens is like, is we get an idea and the idea gets escape velocity from its use and becomes an identity. I used to say back in the days when it was, William Lane Craig versus Christopher Hitchens, I used to say that there was a lot of atheists that identified as rational. Like rationality was an identity. It wasn't that they were rational people that were careful, thoughtful thinkers. It's that they identified as rational, right? Rationality was an identity to them. So they could say the most irrational thing, but because rationality was their identity, which they wrapped themselves around, even if they couldn't, like find their way through a logic problem. They didn't know, but they identified as rationality because they upheld it as like the thing which they were supposed to be, right?
It became an idol in their community. Basically, rationality became an idol, and rationality is a very convenient idol within modernity.
Yeah.
And post-modernity is supposed to corrode that idol, but what we've seen from post-modernity is that it's just always sort of a switch. It's a substitution, because quite clearly you cannot construct an identity or have a frame through which to see the world if you say there are no frames, because
that's right.
People.
So it cracks everything apart. It always dissolves itself. So everything that tries to come up gets dissolved, right? And you could go through this, and we will talk about that. But so that's what I got bothered by, is I looked at what a lot of these progressives, and the chief among them is Kristen Dumais, who
has been on my channel, who is teaching in the place where I got my undergraduate degree,
Calvin College, with James K.A. Smith.
Yeah.
Who loves to be sarcastic and cutting and biting to other people. But man, if you impugn her integrity in the slight, I don't know that I could ever be as brutally sarcastic to another human being as she is. I don't have that in me. So I choose instead to explain what's going on. The way that she soft pedals the influence of Foucault in her, search first through my reformed tradition. I'm sorry, lady, your entire book is a book of archaeology and genealogy. The entire thing is that. That's not, I'm not, if I want to understand archaeology and genealogy, I'm not reading the Westminster Confession. That's not, I don't read Van Til, Cornelius, no, I'm going to read the Archaeology of Knowledge, or I'm going to read The Birth of the Prison, that's what I'm going to read, Kristen. Don't soft pedal your influences. I wear right on my sleeve that I'm influenced by Stanley Grenz, that I am influenced by Alvin Plantinga and William Lane Craig, that I am influenced by Greg Bonson. Not the theonomy, but the other stuff.
Okay. So
and I'm honest about this.
Okay. So let's
my
take Alvin
biggest
Plantinga
problem
and Kristen Dumais, because they both taught at the same school, or maybe James K. Smith and Alvin Plantinga, because they both taught in the same department. And so according to you, what went wrong?
Oh, there's a long story. I think, how do I put this? I want to be careful. There's a way. It's very hard to find a way into the problem, because first you have to understand what the postmodernism is and how it works. Then once you see how it works, you can go, oh, that's how it's getting in. So I'm debating on how to do this. I think I'll go about it like this. We have to understand something about, we're going to briefly set the stage for postmodernism. Okay. We need to read something from Nietzsche. I wasn't expecting to do this, but here we go.
I told you, expect the unexpected. It's a conversation. It ain't scripted.
Nope. That's good though. But I can just Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried, I seek God, I seek God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Has he got lost? Asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Asked another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage or emigrated? Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. Whither is God? He cried. I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained the earth from the sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward, in all directions. Is there any up or down? Are we not straying through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? God too decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owed and bled to death under our knives? Who will wipe this blood off of us? Let me read that again. What was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned, has bled to death under our knives? Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods to simply appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us, for the sake of this deed, he will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners. They too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last, he threw his lantern on the ground, and it broke into pieces and went out. I have come too early, he said to them. My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is more distant than them, more distant than most stars, and yet they have done it to themselves. It has been related that the same day the madman forced his way into several churches and there struck up his Requiem Aeternam Deo. Led out and called to account, he is said to have replied nothing but, what are all these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God? So that's neat. So just think for a second about what he's asking here. He says, are we always moving? Whither is we moving now? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually backward, forwards, up and down? Who has wiped away the horizon? Has it not become colder? Do we have to light lanterns now in the morning hour? What's Nietzsche saying here? He's saying that all of the things which we use to orient ourselves in reality have disappeared. Our lighthouses, our compass, our anchors are all gone. So here's the analogy, what Nietzsche is seeing here. What Nietzsche saw originally is that once Nietzsche is a forerunner for Derrida and Foucault. Nietzsche doesn't quite do what Derrida does. Nietzsche does not get into Saussure the way that Derrida does, and doesn't deconstruct the sign the way that Derrida does and Derrida does in the grammatology. And he doesn't do Foucault's power analysis quite the way that Foucault does. He doesn't understand it, but the basic impulses are there. And Nietzsche's saying, like, that's why he says, I've come too early. He sees it. He sees it's on its way. And what's he saying? He's like, look, your linchpin for reality, your absolute reference, your ontic reference, the thing, your foundation, your frame, your core, that which the gravity of reality that holds it all together, everything that causes the orbit, that's been yanked out. it's not the literal thing, it's the conceptual thing. God is your eternal conceptual framework within which everything else fits. And what he's saying is, that's gone. Okay? That's what Nietzsche is saying there. That's why he's saying he's forced his way. He says, these are the, what he says, he threw his lantern on the ground and broke to pieces. He says, I've come too early. Because he has. This is written in 1882. It's 100 years away. Derrida doesn't show up at Johns Hopkins University and read Structure, Sign, and Play until 1967. Right? Mm-hmm. That was Derrida's first essay against structuralism and against frame. That was his first. That was the first deconstructive lob into the academy. Was Structure, Sign, and Play in 1967. Grammatology follows a couple of years later after Spivak translates it from the French. He sees it coming, and Nietzsche's saying, look, once you get rid of God, once you get rid of that, you're back to your medieval problem of universals, right? Where do you get your categories from? All of your conceptual anchors are gone. So here's what we're going to do. Oh, I wish I had a bit we could play here, because George Carlin does a beautiful job of this.
Oh, let's not. But just tell it.
I'll just do it. He talks about the little moments that make us all the same, and he says, "Have you ever been walking up a stair and you think there's one more stair and you go boing?" Or have you ever been like got to pick up a suitcase, you think it's full and empty and you go woo? And he uses another example. He says, "Have you ever been sitting in front and there's a train beside you, or a car beside you, and you're in the car, or there's a train in front of you, and one of them starts moving and you're not sure which one it is?" Okay, now think of this. You're in the car, the train starts moving, and the car next to you starts, when you start going, oh, am I rolling? And you hit the brake. Yet still one car moves and the train's moving. And you're looking, you see the car moving, you see the train moving, so you're hitting the brake. And so what do? You want to orient yourself. So you look off and you see a building, okay? To orient yourself, to figure out, am I moving, or are the cars and the train moving? What's moving, me or the train?
Right.
Okay, so now picture you're looking at the building. Okay, what if the building moves? And the light post moves, and the track moves, and the steering wheel turns forever in any direction, and you push the brake and it just keeps going and going till the end, and it never stops. That is postmodernism. There's no end, there's no stopping point, there are no absolute ontic reference, there is no absolute linchpin for reality. There are no conceptual anchors. Now,
well, that's the assertion, but that's not the practice of it.
Oh, well, I would say that it is the practice of it.
Really?
But the practice of it doesn't work within any particular individual postmodernist. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. We'll come back to that in just a second.
Okay.
Because postmodernism deconstructs all the frameworks, it's not to say that nobody builds another framework. No, it's just that that framework eventually gets deconstructed by somebody else. That's the practice of it.
Oh, okay.
So Kristin Dumais has built a new framework, Christian feminism. Okay, well, somebody else will deconstruct it, right? Because of the way postmodernism functions.
So
what that means is this: it's not that any of them deconstruct themselves. Even Caputo is trying now to get out of this by saying, well, yes, but I've an unconditional. And it's like, do you know how easy it is for me to deconstruct your binary between conditional and unconditioned? Like, that's exactly, you're putting that on the table for me, John, to deconstruct. Because everything can be deconstructed. So in practice, what happens with the postmodernists, it's just, they're always, as the postmodernism sinks deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, when the postmoderns first came in, Jonathan Culler, in his book on deconstruction in 1982, said that deconstruction feels like mastery. That's what he said. And I think that's why it's so powerful, because you can use it. And once you understand how it works and what deconstruction does, you can strip apart any text and you can examine all the ways that meaning functions within it. And once you add that second postmodern premise that there's no absolute frameworks, no absolute reference, that feels like you can, like everything is at your fingertips.
Right.
But to quote,
it feels
somebody
like
else in a
total
different
freedom.
Yeah.
Which of course gets back to Nietzsche.
Well, I would say that the first step, the first taste of it feels like total freedom. I said on Twitter that the first taste of postmodernism feels like liberation, but nihilism and relativism are waiting for you at the bottom of the glass. That's because that's how it ends up.
Yeah. That's
right.
Good. That's a good one.
So yeah, that's pithy. So
it's pithy. That's pithy.
So there's also a cynicism about it. The seeing through of everyone else's work. So I will pull up.
Well, I want to connect some dots here before we run away too far.
Okay. Let's do that. Let's do that.
I just want to get down your quote here because it's something that I'll probably use on my own. I just have to warn you that, pastors are supposed to be holy, righteous people, but preachers are thieves. Because if we hear something we like, we steal it, and we may or may not give you credit for it. So anything that you say in this videotape may be stolen and by me in a sermon or a video or something, just letting you know. So if you go back later and you say, Vanderklay said this, but I said that first. And if you press me out, they'll say, oh yeah, absolutely. I have no problem with that. There's no time in sermons for footnotes. Anyway, but
Mm-hmm.
I think what you really want to get at is that there is, what you're accusing, let's say Kristen Dumais and James K. Smith. I'm going to use them because they are within my tribe. They are signatures of the covenant of, it's not really the covenant of office bearers, because in my Calvin College, now Calvin University, is owned by the Christian Reformed Church in North America, which is my denomination. In order to be a minister of the word in my denomination, I sign the covenant of office bearers, used to be called the form of subscription. In order to be a professor at Calvin University, you have to sign a document that basically says you subscribe to the Heidelberg Catechism, the Belgic Confession, and the Canons of Dort. That is what they sign when they teach at Calvin University. All of those documents are significantly pre-Nietzsche and the madman's declaration of the death of God. So the question is, okay, so on one hand, you say Kristen Dumais and James K. Smith are postmodern. On the other hand, they say we are signers of, let's just use the Heidelberg Catechism because it's the most accessible and sweetest of the confessions. We are signers of the Heidelberg Catechism.
Yeah.
What's going on there? How can they be both?
How do we interpret that?
Yes.
How do we interpret that?
Well,
this is what we do.
Because if you would, because what I don't want to do again is I don't want to here, because a number of Christian Reformed people watch my videos, and I might even put their names in the title just because it's bad form to talk about people when they're not present to defend themselves.
Absolutely. Kristen Dumais blocked me on Twitter when I knocked her, and I just said to her, she said, if you're interested in postmodernism, you should read this book by my friend James K. Smith, Who's Afraid of Postmodernism. And I read that book and I was like, this man is laundering postmodernism in almost under false pretenses.
Wow. I'd love to. I'd love to.
This is God. This is what I mean by God. This is this. I believe in God. Now, there's no absolute objective being that created the universe, but I believe in God. See? This is what God is. I'm redefining God to be this thing right here. And because I've redefined God to be this, I can say that I believe in God. And I'm therefore holding to, if you redefine the terms and deconstruct the terms and rebuild the terms to have different meanings than the original terms, you can just take that confession and throw it in the garbage because it doesn't mean anything anymore. It doesn't matter. That confession no longer serves as a guardrail. And that's how postmodernism functions.
Okay.
John Caputo is very, very, very clear that he does not believe that there is a being called God.
Right. But that's not, see, now you're kind of into some other parts of my channel where I'm talking to someone like Brett Sockold, talking about transubstantiation and talking about, let's say, Ezekiel Kaufman's differentiation between say the polytheistic paganism of the ancient world and the Jewish conceptualization of God, where God is not another thing in the universe, just like there's a cell phone stand and a rusty pliers. I keep props by my desk. Actually, these are things that I have to use for even pliers is very important if you're the small pastor of a local church that has no staff. So, but God is not another thing in the universe. And part of my critique of someone like William Lane Craig and a lot of those conversations, not necessarily Craig, but those kinds of apologetics conversations were, the argument tended to be, is there or isn't there a super thing in the sky? And right from the beginning, the Hebrew God is not another thing in the universe, because going back to Paul on Mars Hill, in him we live and move and have our being. The Hebrew God is not, as let's say Kaufman says, that there's a meta-divine realm in which gods inhabit, and the Hebrew God is just another one of those gods like Zeus. No, the conceptualization of God is different. So I want to be a little bit careful in saying that God is a thing in the universe, and these people have just switched the definitions of that thing, because that gets into a lot of other conversations about I think one of the big problems in a lot of the atheist theist debates on YouTube has tended to be the misconceptualization of what Christians have for a very long time meant by the word God. So
yeah, no, I'm not saddling up Christianity with a straw man of what God is.
Okay. But I want to know,
there is, God does not exist, he insists. There's a call. Okay. There's a call. God is not a person, he is personified within a call. John,
right. Well, God is, this is when I get into my God number one and God number two, because what some do is just basically turn God into a feminine, impersonal arena. And it's quite clear that even though God is arenic in the Bible, God is also agentic. Which is why I think we use masculine. That's why God is, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are all masculine by virtue of the way that they move in this arena that we have. So, I mean, there's a lot. They can act, they insist, they judge, they do all these things. No, that's right.
That sounds like something
I want
a being
to know
would do.
what's so you've got, let's say, James K. Smith and Kristen Dumais, who in all likelihood go to church every Sunday.
Probably. Yeah. Okay.
I have no doubt that they do.
And
Kristen she was, if you look at her interview on my channel, we mostly did biography. Her father was a professor at Dorr, and so she, like many people who teach at Calvin University, very much feel at home in the church. But now you say something has either crept in willfully or unwillfully, and they are wielding something that undermines the system. That
undermines the possibility of everything. The whole thing, acid can wipe away all of it. The postmodern acid can deconstruct the conceptual apparatus of all of it. And then there's nowhere to go, because they say, well, we want to deconstruct it so we can erect something better. Define better. You see the problem here, Kristen?
Well,
so here, I'll act it out. I'll show you what I mean.
Okay.
So the early feminists, there's a cynicism that gets acted out, where they go, oh, I see what you're up to. What you're really trying to do. So an example of that is the feminists. Guy says, I believe in marriage. We should have marriage. And they say, oh, I see what you're trying to do. You want the women to stay at home and raise the kids under the guise of family so that you can go out and have all the power. Oh, I see what you're doing. You say no sex before marriage because you want to control women's bodies. I see what you're doing. Okay. So let's read a portion from Kristen Dumais' book, because this is perfect. This is the perfect. She says, she's talking about Bushnell. She goes, whereas evangelical purity culture reinforces patriarchal relationships by assigning husbands and fathers prominent roles, Bushnell denounced patriarchy. Most significant, Bushnell situated her ethic of restraint within the theology of women's social and religious emancipation. Keep that in mind. She opposed sexual liberation, birth control, and abortion, not because she feared the emancipatory powers of female sexuality, but she was convinced that the new sexual act would ultimately disempower women and play into the hands of sinful men. So the feminists were saying, oh, I see what you're up to. Oh, yeah, you want women's bodies. Oh, and Kristen Dumais saying, no, you've got it wrong. What it really is, oh, I see what you're doing. You just want women to sleep around so you can have, oh, I see. Oh, sinful man, right? They're doing this to each other. It's a conversation of, oh, I see what you're up to. The feminists are saying, oh, they want to disempower women by controlling their bodies. And Kristen Dumais like saying, no, they want to disempower women by turning them into, and you have these two groups trying to out cynical each other. Meanwhile, men are just like, I actually just want to have a family. Like that's they're actually just like, they don't care. So they do this to each other. And so then these radical feminists are going to look at Kristen and say, oh, you're trying to reinstitute the patriarchy. And the Christian feminists are saying, oh, you guys are giving in to male power because it's the men who want to sleep around. Oh, yeah. And the women are saying, oh, that's a stereotype of men. Oh, you're putting women in a box. Oh, you're putting men. And this is ever going back and forth cycle of, oh, I see what you're doing. Right? This is Duke Kwan taking out Kevin DeYoung by saying you're, enforcing basically impulses of white supremacy. Right? Like this is what they're doing in everything. Nothing can survive that, because when you see past what everyone says, and she says this in her book, she talks about how in spite of evangelicals' frequent denials, or in spite of what they say, evangelicalism needs to be viewed as what? As a social and political project, not as a community defined by its theology. Well, what do you do with that? There's nothing I could possibly say. Like, I can't argue with that.
I actually agree with that. I don't think evangelicalism is an ecclesiastical structure. I think evangelicalism is, for the most part, sort of a market strategy that, if you read, let's say, Molly Worthen's Apostles of Reason, the founders of evangelicalism, Carl F. Henry, Billy Graham, they saw a fractured Protestantism and said, yes, we can sort of bring this thing. And I think this goes along with what you just said. I'm just gonna speak as a Christian and call them spirits that inhabit our conversations and our world. And when you were doing that little play on both sides of the mic, the easiest way to understand that movement is, some people have called it a hermeneutic of suspicion. It is this practice. C.S. Lewis often, we are swimming in bulverisms. It's almost like the second Matrix or the third Matrix when Agent Smith starts showing up everywhere. We just have bulverisms everywhere. Oh, the reason you wear a beard is because, and then your mother used to shame your father into shaving or something like this. We're just and then we actually level up and imagine these huge they're and again, in a materialist frame, we sort of disarmed ourselves against these spirits when we said they no longer exist, but they very much exist, and we watch them wreaking havoc with us through history. But
people say, well, evangelicalism is not an evangelical structure. It's not an ecclesiological structure. Yeah, but that's not what she says. What she says is that it's not defined by its theology at all. What she's trying to argue,
that's a little hard to do when you're using it as a term in your book.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's
because it's fundamental to her argument that it is, or David French. So all this little spat we have going on with an evangelicalism, if you use evangelicalism as a term defined by theological convictions, you can't turn around then and say this community isn't being defined by theological convictions, because then you have simply lost the frame in which you are using to make any kind of argument at all.
What she's doing, and I have an article coming out on this, which we'll be able to read, which I elucidate this beautifully.
Do you have a Substack, or I just know you on Twitter.
We will see. I have written it. Okay. We will see where it is published.
Okay.
The thing that she's trying to do is a thing that a lot of she's not trying to show that the theology is wrong. She's trying to socially tank it.
Yeah, yeah. No, and
She wants to
I
spray
think
it with social stink.
right.
That's what she's doing.
And that's exactly what's wrong with her book. Her book is, whereas there's a lot, like you said, when I read the book, I thought there are many fine footnotes here about history and documented, issues within the evangelical framework. That's absolutely true. But the argument you make is much more of an insinuation.
I said yes. Implication and insinuation are coin of the realm. But there's another point here to be made, and that is that her argument that this is all just socially, and we could find out how it's because it's all just social constructs all the way down. But then so is her view, and why should we care? I mean, look, I'm Jewish, right? So my family is Jewish. I'm ethnically Jewish. I'm a Christian by belief, but I'm ethnically Jewish. Like the simple knockdown argument for me, if I wanted to hit back at her, is to say, lady, you got blonde hair, blue eyes, and white skin. Hitler would have loved you.
Exactly.
Like
exactly. That's
right?
what's so easy about all these arguments.
Oh, her dad was a professor. Wait. Wait. Oh, your dad is a professor, eh? Right? Like it's just so easy.
Yeah.
It's just so easy. But there's a deeper point here. It's that because of the methods that she's adopted, nothing stops it. I think she seriously believes that she's like, we're going to hold on to our orthodoxy. No, because here's what's going to happen. The people who pick your book up are going to adopt that, and they're going to apply that to like the Westminster Confession. There was a recent tweet, a guy said that the Nicene Creed was racist, and like Kyle Howard was like, man, you can't deconstruct with white people, you have to deconstruct with black people so that you can avoid this. And I was just like, Robin Henderson Espinosa, who has been gotten the sign off from Brian McLaren, is a trans non-binary Latinx scholar of color who does activist theology. And in that book, the non-binary person who is outside of those terms said that all of Christianity post-Constantine is an empire religion. And if you follow the logic of postmodernism, that's right. I mean, Kyle Howard tried to make a big deal about how, look, these were African bishops. Selected by whom? And for what purpose? Who was picked? Who was given the power to make that creed? And who benefits? Yes, but the Holy Spirit is protecting. Wait, who said that Constantine was listening to the Holy Spirit? After all, what did Foucault say? That people who have power can warp the field of relations, right? And structure the field of relations to create outcomes? Yeah. Constantine's going to select who's going to be there. He's going to pick what the topics will be, and he's going to sit in and watch. So the person who comes up and says, as Christians, we need to get rid of empire, that guy's not getting invited unless he's brought in as the one person who's invited so that they can say that they invited one guy to say it. We considered it and dismissed it via the Holy Ghost. That deconstruction is quick. Pointing out that they were black, we'll just take, Dr. Dyson, Michael Dyson, who said that Kanye West was white supremacy coming out of a black mouth. He called it white supremacy via ventriloquism. Yeah, those black bishops, that's just Constantine's empire theology via ventriloquism, because they were sitting in front of a guy who could execute them with the snap of a finger, and they were picked by him to be there. It's easy to do a deconstruction of the Nicene Creed. Good God, the Westminster Creed, all white males, done.
Yeah. There's no question.
There's no stopping point.
There's no question that this game is full of cheap tricks that anyone can wield. But
there's a deeper point.
Okay, so I'd like to hear that.
The deeper point is this. So we need to talk a little bit about what Derrida actually did. I don't know how to do this quickly, but I'm going to try. One of the things that Dumais has accepted, and that I think James K. Smith has accepted too, and that all these postmodernists eventually accept, is that everything is socially constructed. And a lot of people don't get what they mean by that. They think, this isn't socially constructed, it's right here. That kind of misses the point. Bill Craig, I think, also made this mistake. He got up on stage and said, when he was talking about Derrida's philosophy, and said, words have to mean something. Nobody could live this way. When you pick up a bottle of rat poison, you had better hope it means something. And yeah, if you take it to that conclusion of how that works, yeah, but that's not how the postmodernisms in practice actually walk it out. And that's my critique of Bill Craig. That's not what they do in practice. And that's not really what Derrida was getting at. So to explain Derrida quickly is very hard. So I'm going to try and use a little bit of an analogy to get to the nub of it. Because to go through his deconstruction of the sign and of Saussure is going to be, that's an hour. We don't have that. Well, we might, but we don't want to do that because it'll suck up the rest of our time and then we won't be able to talk. So I want you to picture four men sitting. This is a patriarchal example. We have four men on a construction site and they're going to eat lunch. So one man finds one of the buckets, those big buckets, flips it over, sits down. Another guy picks up a bucket, flips it over, sits down. Third guy picks up a bucket, flips it over, sits down. Reaches over, grabs one of the other bucket, turns it over and says to the fourth guy, come here, grab a chair. Now, that bucket was a bucket 5 seconds ago. Now it's turned into a chair. And you think, well, how did that happen? Was there some essence of bucketness in the bucket that when he turned it over, slithered out into the universe and was replaced by an essence of chairness? No. Was there some structure within the molecules that was chairful or chair-ish that inserted itself? Well, no. Chair just refers to, in that comment, chair just means the things that we happen to be sitting on. So it could be like a bucket. It could be this orange amplifier sitting here. See, I could sit on one of those and that could be a chair. I'm being convicted now because it's like you're showing off. Don't show off your amplifiers. Okay, don't be proud.
I'm not an amplifier guy. No lust involved here.
Okay, good. Okay, good. I feel slightly better. Is the floor a chair when I sit on it? So what are the boundaries? And so what that's going to mean is that there is no thing, no linchpin that holds in place the meaning of the word chair. It's just a word that's meaning comes from its relationship to other things around us.
Right. And
so
if you listen to John Vervaeke, you'll say, well, this goes all the way back to nominalism. And many make that move. This goes all the way back to nominalism. Basically, nominalism sets up this, there is no chair.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that Derrida understands that because Derrida's well read and he was through great pains in structure, sign, and play to make the point that that's not what he's doing. What he says is if you go back, all attempts at metaphysics, God, substance, essence, forms, are all attempts to create a center or a structure for reality. And he says it's just replacing infinitely center for center. And his point is there is no center. That's what he's arguing.
Right.
There are no essences. There are no substances. There is no unifying conceptual apparatus that has traction in reality that holds things together. There is no inherent unity. Think of it like this. I take a bunch of Legos, I make a car out of it. You take my car, you take it apart, you build a house out of it. Then you take all the Legos and you put them all together. And you lay them out beside each other. Is that a car or is that a house? It's neither. And what Derrida says is car and house are just words that we use to refer to arrangements. They're not things in the world. They're concepts that we've grafted on in some way.
Right.
We are making the mistake of thinking that there really is a carness in the thing, and it's not there.
Right.
And this is the insight which people have grafted on, which they don't think they're grabbing on.
So now we would imagine that James K. Smith, at least, we don't know about the philosophical self-consciousness of Kristen DeMay, but we would imagine that James K. Smith at least has an understanding of the philosophy that you just laid out here. My question for you is, are they unwittingly propagating I'm going to say a spirit that they don't know has infected their work to the degree that they are sort of Trojan horses? Or, I mean, at what level of intentionality are they participating in what you've just laid out?
How's that?
Yeah. Well, and because, you know, what you just laid out.
So here's the thing. I think that they believe that they're going to be able to hold something together after doing all of this. I think that they believe that they can go as far as Derrida. I mean, this is the bone of contention and debate between Martin Hägglund and John Caputo back in 2011, whether the logic of deconstruction implies atheism or not. And Caputo insists that it's not.
That's
insists it's religious. And Hägglund is like, no, you're done if you accept deconstruction. For the record, Hägglund is right. And they go back and forth. Now, Caputo is a very, very well known and well understood scholar, but I tend to think that Jeffrey Bennington is correct. Jeffrey Bennington was who wrote a book with Derrida, was a student of Derrida's, or trained by Derrida, a mentee of Derrida's, said that as soon as you accept deconstruction, that concept of God that you have as anything at all like a being that could be prayed to and have a personal relationship with you needs to be seriously rethought. The idea that you could have a conscious individual incarnated as that thing needs to be seriously rethought. I don't know how it's possible to have a thing that has no essence or substance, a thing that is not a being, be incarnated as a person, as a physical human being. How do you incarnate a thing that has no substance or essence or being or anything at all or unity to it? Now, that's the problem. And James Smith and these other guys think that they're going to dodge that. They think that's a bullet that they can avoid. And I'm saying, if you take Derrida seriously, you actually can't. Your deconstructed world needs no room for that. And I'll do you one better. All of your attempts to try are going to involve standards which are themselves socially constructed. It's social constructs all the way down, and there's no place for you to start. Your house is built entirely on sand. That's your problem. See, this is why I am something of a foundationalist in the mold of, say, Timothy McGrew. And part of the reason is here's an analogy.
I almost feel like I'm a setup. It's like Bethel's gonna jump into the frame and say, "Gotcha, Vanderclay."
Bethel,
Yes.
Bethel McGrew.
Yes.
Let's look at something here. We need to have a look at here it is. One of the first, really prominent works of postmodern architecture is the Vanna Venturi house. So the 5-room house stands about 30 feet tall. It has a monumental front facade. It's it's built so that it'll have certain parts that are massively, and then like a little tiny window to juxtapose that. And it's built so that to demonstrate that the architecture, that nothing in the architecture is absolutely necessary. Nothing in the architecture is required. There is no essential thing, that the architecture can be whatever you want it to be. So it doesn't have to have a use.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to have a purpose.
Yeah.
There's another building.
So let me give you a little orientation.
So here's
go. Okay, finish your
so
argument.
I'm gonna slam the point.
Okay.
So the postmodernists made it so that you can build the building however you want. You can make it as tall as you want, as short as you want. You can have any purpose you want or no purpose at all. You can put staircases anywhere. You can make the windows as big or small. Nothing needs to have a purpose. Nothing needs to follow any rules at all. We can break them all. And they did that with everything. But I will put money down that, you know what they didn't do that with? The foundation. Because just like your epistemology, the foundation is the place where what you're building meets the world. And if the place where what you're building meets the world isn't on a solid foundation, it's going to fall apart and crumble. And that is what postmodernism does. It is a house that is built on sand, as Jesus said. If you're wondering where I get that analogy from, Jesus called this bluff a very long time ago. And that is exactly what this stuff is going to do. Because postmodernism asserts flatly, and James K. Smith and Kristen Dumais and all these people are stuck with this once they accept the social constructivist doctrine. John Searle hammered this in the New York Review of Books, is that once you accept that, there's no way out. You are trapped, because no matter what you do, it's a social construct that can be deconstructed, and there is absolutely nothing that you can do to hold up. Even in Kristen Dumais' book, when she asserts that certain things are wrong, she has a moral standard. Does she have a moral standard that escapes the doctrine of social constructivism and human interests? Because if not, I'm sorry, Kristen, but you're trapped. Just like everyone else. It's just an assertion of raw power. And this is the problem that none of them seem to be grasping. Their epistemology is going to absolutely crack apart on them. And that is the thing that I'm screaming about, because none of them see it. They're at the Jonathan Culler stage where the deconstruction feels like mastery. And they don't realize that the nihilism that's coming at the bottom of the glass is going to eat them. And if it doesn't eat them, it'll be the next generation that it eats.
Right. And that is what's happening. So, earlier on you had, I think you probably had some questions about who watches my channel. And my channel is sort of strange in that I just realized this a little while ago when Jonathan Peugeot hit 10 million views on his channel. I thought, I wonder how many views my channel has, because I've got just a portion of his subscriber base, but I had about a little over 4 million views. And I thought, how could I have so many more views with fewer subscribers? And the reason is I do put out more videos, but people are a lot of the people who watch my channel are a fairly determined lot, partly because my focus has not been building a large audience, but rather trying to encourage people to build communities. Anyway, to get down to this, my audience tends to be those who have gotten to the bottom of the glass.
That's right.
My audience are the people who have gone, because and I found them at the other end of the Jordan Peterson crusade, because what happened was I saw Jordan Peterson addressing a whole bunch of very interesting things, and I saw him attracting a very unusual audience, because these were people that were post Sam Harris, and and so then I began talking to these people. And I discovered that many of these people were suffering from, I'd call it nihilistic induced depression. And somehow watching hours and hours and hours of Jordan Peterson exercised the spirit that was making them depressed.
Correct.
So the fact that so much of, and we can throw all sorts of bulverisms about this, basically speculating on the either conscious or unconscious motivations of a certain class of people, both inside and outside the church. The fact that in many respects, church is insignificant in some of these structures, which is a very interesting question that I'd like to address at some point in the future.
The churches are not opaque. They are transparent, and they are permeated by this phenomenon.
Yes, right. Absolutely. This
phenomenon is like a radiation that goes right through the walls.
Right.
So I'm going to read something to you, which I wrote about this exact thing.
Okay.
And this is on Twitter. Christians, listen up. The faith struggles of young people today aren't like past generations. The typical questions: scientific atheists demanding proofs of God's existence, the problem of evil, questions about other religions, are not what young people are asking. The standard Christian apologetics, so Aquinas' 5 ways, William Lane Craig's Kalam cosmological argument, presuppositional apologetics, Alvin Plantinga's work on epistemology, can't get traction because they don't speak to the questions and issues today's young people struggle with. Today's young people are not asking, does God exist? What about evil? How about other religions? What about science? You must answer the questions and engage with the issues that people are actually struggling with. Those questions are not what young people currently struggle with. The big questions of life fit into 4 categories: origin, where did we come from? Meaning, what's the purpose of life? The telos. Morality, how should we live? And destiny, what will become of us? Quibble all you like, but those are the questions that every worldview faces. And those are the questions that people actually ask. Nobody outside of universities cares about the questions theologians or philosophers think we should find interesting. What people care about is, where did I come from? Why am I here? How should I live? And what will happen to me? The struggle of today's young people is about meaning. All of the questions young people ask are about meaning. They live in a world where nothing is stable, and they are constantly told everything, including every aspect of their identity, is socially constructed. They live in a deconstructed world where everything is constantly interpreted and reinterpreted, and they're bombarded with information from all angles. Meaning, both linguistic meaning and meaning in terms of purpose, is just under the surface of every single question that they ask. So much of the depression, anxiety, self-doubt malaise, and existential angst of young people is caused by the absence of meaning and purpose. It's all been deconstructed and said to be merely the product of linguistic systems or power relations or arbitrary cultural norms. In a deconstructed world, there is nothing transcendent or objective to serve as a linchpin for meaning and purpose. You can't have a meaningful discussion about that fact because anything that's expressed publicly gets instantly deconstructed via social media. Everything that was seen as meaningful or purposeful is deconstructed and, according to the deconstructors, shown to be nothing more than an arbitrary social construct having no more objective meaning or purpose than anything else. Meaning is seen as a social illusion. In a deconstructed world, the transcendent is replaced with a socially constructed knockoff of the real thing. The truth is replaced by opinion and consistence. The good is replaced by wants and pleasures, and the beautiful is replaced by taste and style. In a deconstructed world, there is no objective meaning or purpose. It's all been wiped away. That is the world we are in now. Those are the concerns of young people. You need to look at meaning. Focusing on anything else is misguided. You must focus on meaning. I am convinced that the success hustle porn, got my grind set on, the myopic focus on ever more unique gender identities, and the attempt to build up racism and homophobia as though they were Goliath's need of slaying are all products of the postmodern search for meaning. You don't need to show the young people God exists so that the Bible is true. You need to convince people that God would even matter if he existed at all, and that the Bible ever had meaning to begin with. They don't think Christianity was wrong. They think it doesn't matter. Meaning is the thing that matters. You need to understand the nihilistic despair that lies at the heart of postmodernism and figure out how to inject hope and meaning into a world of nihilistic cynicism and despair. That is what needs an answer.
Right. And I bookmark. What I use one of my blogs for is just bookmarking this stuff. And so I thought I probably retweeted. I thought that was an excellent thread that I think, really hits on it. Now
they flattened the world. That's why Peterson is popular. They flattened the world.
Right.
Their analysis to get everything down and be like, well, it's the blah, 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 blah. Once they said that everything is a product of that, That's why you see there's a commercial that there's a woman who does the cartoons and says a complete woman, and it's one woman with her family and children, and then there's another woman with like a house coat on staring into a computer eating a piece of pizza. It's like these are both complete women, and it's like you can't elevate anything. Nothing gets elevated. It's just whatever you want you can do, whatever you'd like. Okay, why would you want to do something? Well, I see it as valuable. Why? Your values are socially constructed. It's all right back. So everything gets flattened out and nothing is raised up. And people look around and say, well, and people say, look, you can do whatever you want. You're liberated. You can do anything. And their question is, but why do anything? Why? You could become an astronaut. Why? Because you want to go to space. Why? Is going to space better? Or is that just go to space? Oh, you want to colonize the stars? Oh, it's that same thing that when you colonized the Native Americans. Oh, it's that spirit of adventure. Oh, white male power. Oh, I see what you're doing. Right? I mean, you could see through everything. You could get married. Oh, you want to control a woman's body? Okay, well then don't get married. Oh, you're giving into the desires of men by sleeping. Oh, I see. Right? Like it's all of it. The cynicism destroys everything. You see through everything. It becomes completely opaque. Everything gets completely flattened out. When you try to see through everything, you can't see anything, because if you see through everything, what are you looking at? I look through the window so I can see the street out front. If the street becomes clear and the house becomes clear and the tree becomes clear, I can't see those things either. Now I see the Earth's core. Well, what if that's clear? Okay, well, you can see the stars. Well, what if those are clear? To see through everything is the same as to not see anything at all.
And again, I mean, for my audience, I mean, you're preaching to the choir on this score, because my audience has gotten to the bottom of the glass.
And what I'm trying to show is that this is inevitable in postmodernism.
No, that's true. And I think there's part of what, so myself and the little pastor cohort that I work with out here in Sacramento, of the church plants that we planted, one of the things that we've noted is that in many ways, students are leaving Christian colleges like my alma mater pre-wired for their deconstruction.
That's right. Yes, that is correct.
It's
that
like
exactly it.
It's like when you buy, so you have all these tract homes because they can't build enough housing in California because everyone wants to live here because of the weather. But when you buy the basic house, because you can buy all these fancy, high-priced, upgrades, which is basically graduate school. But what they do is they put in all the wires in the walls and everything. And so basically, once the kids get out of college, and now mom and dad are no longer there to push church on them, and college is no longer there to sort of be a buffer area. Now suddenly they think, oh, I could take this screwdriver and my house is pre-wired for deconstruction. And so this is, and someone doesn't need to be initiated into all of the fancy philosophy that you've just laid out.
No,
to
Twitter will do it.
Have it activated in their lives and felt at an implicit level, and that then leads them into all kinds of, then they start looking for other religions and all the wrong places and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's right. You want to know why that happens?
Sure.
Okay, here's what happens. There are 3 levels of philosophy. This is how it actually works. Now, I'm sure that there is a very careful epistemologist out there somewhere, and a very careful philosopher with excellent degrees who can tell me why I'm wrong. But I got 65,000 followers with a blue Twitter bird tweeting about postmodernism and explaining stuff. So pretty clearly, I have a very good grasp about how this stuff is communicated, and I'm very, very good at communicating and explaining things. So this is how this actually goes. I don't care whether or not it's epistemically sound. This is what people are actually doing. So I'm a sociologist. Okay, get a following. If you think you're better than me, and if you think you know more than I do about communication, out-communicate me. You're an expert. If you can't do that, maybe hold your horses. Okay, let me preempt that. This works at 3 levels. So you come home at night and your kid says to you, Dad, why is killing wrong? And you come and you say, well, and you say, thou shalt not kill. And the kid says to you, but Dad, That's a good answer here, but the kids at school don't believe in the Bible. Your prescription doesn't fit. And why? Well, what's happening? So here's what's happening. There are 3 levels to the game. Level 1 is the academic, rational, thoughtful philosophy that occurs in books. So that's like Alvin Plantinga, or like Foucault is operating at level 1, Derrida is operating at level 1, Cornelius Van Til is operating at level 1, John Searle is operating at level 1, Donald Davidson, who's one of my favorite philosophers, is operating at level 1, Frege, Carnap, A.J. Ayer, those are all operating at level 1. Okay, notice almost all those guys are analytics, except for Derrida and Foucault. Okay, level 1 is the rationality, that's the thinking. That's the crystal clear reading, thinking, pondering. Level 2 is the level of the arts and experience. Music, movies, books, your own emotions, your feeling, right? When you go out, how you experience the world, and also through the arts, your experience in movies, in books, and television. Okay. Level 3 is prescribing. Okay. In order to do well, to spread your philosophy well, you do your thinking at level 1, you illustrate and propagate and explain at level 2, and then you prescribe using level 3. Okay, that's what you actually should do. What that looks like in reality is that you'd have a William Lane Craig thinking very carefully about these matters at level 1. William Lane Craig, Augustine, Alvin Plantinga, Peter Van Inwagen, J.P. Moreland are all at level 1 thinking about things. Then you'd have your artists at level 2 fleshing that out and showing what that could look like at the highest level, and the glory and the beauty of who God is and what a well-lived life could be. And then level 3 is telling people how to do what they see at level 2, because most of them wouldn't understand what's going on at level 1. We did not do that in evangelicalism. We said level 1, and then at level 3 we said, do this, trust us because of level 1. Meanwhile, Sartre wrote plays. Camus wrote plays. The artists, the English departments who took up the deconstruction, wrote plays and stories and movies and books. And what they did is they painted a picture at level 2 in the arts of the fuddy-duddy old, the Ned Flanders vision of Christianity. That is what you are. And so your prescriptions are in the mind of the child tied to like Ned Flanders and Archie Bunker. That is who you are. And the kids, well, I don't want to be Ned Flanders and Archie Bunker. I want to be like the hero. Well, how do you do that? Well, whose prescriptions are they following to become the great hero? Well, it's the prescription in the culture coming out of what? Whatever happens to be the philosophy of the day. Who happens to be at the top of the food chain at any given moment? They're looking at, in the past, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Madonna. Who is at the top of the arts that they're going to look at and see? Christina Aguilera, Britney Spears, and Madonna making out of the 2003 MVAs. See, this is why I think women have had it much harder, actually. Because I got to look up to Bono and The Edge and see these men with families being rock stars and making beautiful music. That's what I got to see. I got to see Buddy Guy making music and making songs and being praised even in his old age for his music. The women got what? Madonna, who at age 67 is still like, I still got it.
Yeah, well, what you
still
got?
Here, right? That's the difference.
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, this is a patriarchal construct that figures out. No, this is a misunderstanding of the very idea of what we're supposed to be aiming at. Nobody bothered to lift up and say, hey, there was no great Christian artists, because we don't have any of those. Our artists are second rate. Let's be clear about that. To lift up and compete And the ones that did get absorbed in the machine, like Katy Perry, apparently had an evangelical Christian upbringing. It doesn't matter. Megan Fox had an evangelical Christian upbringing. That didn't matter. We emasculated our men and then said, well, the women will pick who, whoever it is from the bar or whatever guy that they see down the street who's not a gelded Christian male, right? This is what we did. We deconstructed our whole thing so that nobody knew what anything was. The culture is constantly deconstructing, right? That's what the culture is doing. It's emasculating. I don't mean like in the sense of it cut its balls off. I'm saying that they cut off the engine of the way that men and women understood themselves. That's what I mean. The culture was deconstructing on that level. Okay. That machine is going and going and going. And the Christians are saying, trust, we're going to prescribe these rules. Trust us because level 1, look at Bill Craig. And that entire level 2 of the arts and experience is gone. I would trade the entire corpus of Alvin Plantinga's literature for a single stained glass window. I write and I play music because that to me is more valuable to us. It is what we desperately need. This is the problem. See, William Lane Craig's apologetic isn't wrong so much as it was incomplete. It only dealt at level 1. Someone needed to come along at level 2, and we didn't have anybody. The problem with there was a guy who wrote 2015. I can find the guy's name, but he wrote he tried to do a synthesis of William Lane Craig and John Caputo, but not like a Hegelian synthesis. What he tried to do is say, what is it that everyone likes about Bill Craig? And what is it that everyone likes about John Caputo? And say, like, let's kind of take the best of both of those. And he gets pretty close, I think, to what's actually going on. Caputo, I mean, is wrong about everything, but he writes in a way that is at least somewhat literary. You could almost see something, if you kind of squint, you can almost see something beautiful. Whereas Craig is like reading an engineering manual. It's right, but it's boring. And I love Bill Craig. It's interesting to me as a philosopher, but to an electrician or a plumber or someone who wants to paint, having a conversation on how the divine aseity of God could be cashed out ontologically is not something that's going to get the juices flowing. So they say we want, and this is where we're missing.
Oh, and
we have completely stepped out of this.
Yeah,
we've set it aside.
I've got a lot more thoughts about that than we have time. I would go all the way down to the level of even beyond the arts, because in some ways, a lot of what you outlined today is sort of the Jonathan Peugeot origin story. So my first conversation with Peugeot, I did what I usually do. I'm a nosy pastor. I dive into what made them. And when you listen to Jonathan Peugeot's origin story, you basically articulate it. And where that leaves people who have gotten to the bottom of the glass and found nihilism is what they must do is now work on constructing a life, which in order to construct a life, you need to construct a community. Human beings really don't do well as single individuals. You need to construct a community. The art will grow out of that community. The thinking will grow out of that community, but you need to construct a community. You need to construct more than just an individual, even one house. You need to construct a village of such so that people can begin to inhabit and actually live out the post-nihilism world. And
yes,
and my frustration has been the I get frustrated. I get frustrated with individuals who say, with one of these mass movements, we've made a terrible mistake, we need to go back. we can't, what again,
No,
postmodernity is one of these things that you can't unsee. Once
you
you
can't go
learn this
back.
deconstruction trick, whatever
That's right.
motivation is welling up inside of you, or whatever spirit is inhabiting you to deconstruct a certain thing for whatever means you desire, once you learn that powerful tool, you can't unlearn it. And so what you have to do is stop using it to a degree, but you also need to understand, and this is where I think all of the conversations and what we call this little corner of the internet, all of this stuff is an attempt to, okay, well, all right, so social constructs are real. These now I'm seeing in this little corner of the internet actually conversations about egregores, which is like, where's that word come from? Basically, it's principalities and powers. It's this middle spirit layer that continues to inhabit us. And so but the quest of all of this is actually to embody and live out the reality in this post-reality world. And that involves, and how does one seek that? You don't really seek it in your head theoretically. That's the wrong level of analysis. You seek it in your life, embodied relationally, communally, every day, because it has to be real, because it's where the upper register of all this theory and all this all this heaven and the lower register of God's good earth actually meets. So
Yeah, I would add a couple of things. I do think that we do need to have an intellectual response to it.
oh, absolutely.
I think the intellectual response offered by people like Dr. Craig sometimes is very good. He does have an article where he's dealing with objections to divine aseity, and he talks about postmodernism, and he deals with John Caputo a little bit there. Some of it is very good, but I think he misses that really essential piece about how the frameworks work, and that really essential piece about the social constructivist point. So I think we need to deal with that. Once you see, people say, once you put the postmodern glasses on, they're always on. I don't think that's necessarily correct. I think the thing to say is you always see with the postmodern glasses until you can take them off. And you never forget what the world looked like through those lenses, but you can take them off. And I think that you can break, I think and people are going to get let me just preempt the bargain. But Searle's an atheist. How could you use atheism too? It's not just about one single belief. It's a worldview question. Searle does a very, very good job of highlighting the thing about postmodernism that it does and cracking it. Once you can crack it, it kind of, I did a video where I showed a magic trick. It's not a really well done magic trick, but I just do the magic trick and I show it. Then I show how the magic trick works. And then I say, okay, now I've shown you how the magic trick works. I'm going to do it again. And then you see it and you're just like, it doesn't fool me.
Right.
Postmodernism is like that.
Right.
The postmoderns are like linguistic magicians. Kristen Dumais is a linguistic magician. The way that she can pull stuff out, the way that she can use words to kind of slide along a continuum, right? The way that she can, I mean, it's utterly brilliant. But once you see how the trick works, it quits working. For example, I give you a high five and you go say, Mike gave me a high five. Mike and I slapped hands. Mike slapped my hand. Mike slapped me. Mike assaulted me. My name is Mike, in case anyone cares.
One of the most common names of your generation, so you're safe.
That's exactly. Can you get the last one? Right? This is the point, right? So you just move it along. So this is, and you'll see this a lot in their discourse analysis when they're doing things. They'll say, well, What does marriage entail? It entails a bride and a groom. And when we think about grooms, we have motifs of a powerful man who was conquered, and conquering contains motifs of blah, blah. And it's just like, it's word association. It's just word association. That's the analysis. The analysis is word association. This is associated with white supremacy. By who and how?
And what
Those things are just thought to be
right.
connected, and then the discourse analysis follows in that. You can learn to see that and not be tricked by it and not get suckered into it. The second thing is, once you get to the bottom of the glass and you realize how you got there, what you can do with the postmodernism and say is, what is it picking up on? I always like to say, people, if you can hear a worldview or an ideology that a lot of people believe and you think it's too stupid to believe, you haven't understood it. People are pretty smart. There are reasons that people are doing this. That when people say, I can't believe Wokal Distance has all these followers, how did that happen? I always say the same thing I said about Lena Dunham back in the aughts and early 20-teens. This woman is eating cake on a toilet and doing an entire show about how it's like Sex in the City on steroids, a new level of nihilism. She is one of the most popular women of her generation. You had better figure out why, because people are flocking to her television show. Sex in the City is a hit. This is so stupid. You had better figure out why.
I agree. Hang on. Let me get something. I'm not leaving. I'm just, I'm doing like
that's okay.
Except I think in our discourse, we have to get beyond the individuals, because I remember when, so we have a mutual friend who, when she was writing this book, you know, he knew that, of course, I was making videos about Jordan Peterson. She thought she might pay more attention to Jordan Peterson in this book. He only got a couple little references. My biggest disappointment with the book is the lack of addressing the subtitle. Jesus and John Wayne. Oh, you've got my interest. How white evangelicals corrupted a faith and fractured a nation. It's like, okay, this is a historical text. If you really want to read this text, you should read it, because I've known plenty of Christian Reformed book groups that have read this text, and I always tell them you should probably begin with George Marsden's Fundamentalism in American Culture, because she's actually mentioned in Marsden's book as an attribute, because she was probably a student or getting her graduate studies or something. She's in the CRC, but there is in the culture spirits that are working through people. And Kristen, I have a sense of what professors at Calvin University make, and it ain't much. In fact, there was a lot of years ago, there was a position open at Calvin that I applied to, and I remember even comparing the salary I would make at Calvin compared to what I make in my little church here, it would be a significant pay cut. And I thought, ooh, people go and teach at this school because they have a mission and a passion for it. And so, but the way that this book has sold, I expect she's made some good money off this book.
We could do a Marxist analysis of Christians, because Kristen was supposed to put out a book on Hillary Clinton's faith, but Kristen did not put out a book on Hillary Clinton's faith. Kristen put out that book and now has a second book contract. We might want to do a Marxist analysis of her economic interests in her change of direction and career.
Exactly. You can.
You're selling books.
This is a cheap and easy game that you can play all day long on just about anyone and anything.
On anyone and anything.
Exactly. But I think to me, the application of Ephesians 6 is we battle not against flesh and blood. And that flesh includes Kristen Dumais, it includes James K. Smith, and because there are principalities and powers that are working through. And in order to do that sort of exorcism, because the irony is that in many ways, Kristen Dumais and James K.R. Smith are not simply biological creatures contained in skin with hair and nostrils and eyes and fingers and toes. That we are all, in many ways, Wokal Distance is a being that is connected to you, but also far beyond you, because you actually are a being that lives in the Twitterverse, even more than just the physical person. And I think, part of what,
I'm from the internet and I'm here to help.
That's it. I live on Twitter. Oh, good. But part of what my goal has been in this little corner of the internet is to disarm these spirits. And I think that's really what you're doing with your explanations. You're working to expose the spirits and say, oh, this little hermeneutic of suspicion, this is a very old, very cheap trick that you can actually, this thing is like an unreliable guard dog that will turn on its master. That's what this is. And what you
the universal solvent.
Right, that's right. What you can't do with this dog is welcome it into your home and have it as a pet.
No, this is the whole point. This is radioactive, and it's going to get on everything it touches.
Right.
This is
right.
like once Chernobyl goes down, all the surrounding cities empty out.
Right.
This is what this will do. It can't be stopped.
Right.
It has to be countered.
Right.
It can't. The postmodern age is not something that we. It is not something that we. How do I put this? We cannot undo it. We have to go through it.
Yes. Agreed.
We can't, it's not possible. So one of the things Marnie Gauthier says.
Well, to address it, we address it with what Christianity has always addressed the world with, which is
truth.
Well, but truth is too abstract. I'm not discounting truth, but finally and fundamentally, it is embodied. Now, certainly Christianity had an intellectual game with which it contended with the philosophies and the religions of its day. But what finally, fundamentally had it steal the culture of the empire was the life and the communities of its people. I'm a pastor. This is what I major in.
It was level 2.
Not just
level 2.
The communities create art.
It's not. I'm not saying just the arts.
Right.
I'm not just saying it's at the level of the arts. It's arts and experience, and your experience with the lives of people who are Christians is going to be as much a part of it as the arts.
Right.
It's the arts and experience that level 2 is. What is it like for you? That's the level of the meaning.
Right. But now I want to double down on your anti-nominalist assertions by saying that part of what happens in this conversation is we say that meaning is a feeling. And what I think where Lewis tried to go is that meaning is not simply a feeling the way pain might be a social construct. Social constructs can create deep pain in me, perhaps deeper pain than, let's say, a needle or a gum jabar, let's say. But it is not merely a feeling, because the feeling is a tell of a deeper reality. In other words, and that's
I was made for somewhere else.
That's right. I was not. This gets tricky.
I'm being poetic there.
Yes, I understand. But it's that. But this is, I think, in all of my work now in the last 4 years, with those who have gotten to the bottom of the glass and despaired, this is the reconstruction that we are experiencing. And it is not a dismissal that there are evil social constructs, or that also I'm a Calvinist, so that in fact all social constructs that I participate in are tainted with evil. I'm not a skeptic that racism is, permeates our institutions, and that men quickly and willingly grab towards all sorts of things in order to have supremacy in their endemic struggle over women, and vice versa. None of that I'm uncomfortable with. But all of this is to imagine that it isn't merely all of these things in the way that I think you described very well, that there is no bottom. And
that's right.
The challenge, and so, say what we got from Jordan Peterson is his attempt to say there are tells in the universe of a bottom. There, even though I think you said it very nicely at the beginning with Nietzsche, that now suddenly we are disoriented because we can no longer see the stars to navigate by. So how will we navigate?
You're going to get hit by reality.
Well, that's right. Right? That's right.
Reality is the thing that you run into when your beliefs are false. And when you run aground on the nihilism, what happens when all your instruments, when the lights go out and you lose your instruments and the night comes and your compass doesn't work and your anchor and you're adrift at sea, you find out where you are when you crash on the rocks. That's where I'm here. I agree with you. So this ties in perfectly to the Marnie Gauthier quote. She says, Post-modernity is said to be a culture of fragmentary sensations, eclectic nostalgia, disposable simulacra, and promiscuous superficiality, in which the traditionally valued qualities of depth, coherence, meaning, originality, and authenticity are evacuated or dissolved amid the random swirl of empty signals. Yes. But the bus still hits you if you step in the road. Yep. You don't get to dodge reality.
Right.
And all of the attempts to say, yes, but what is a bus? The bus driver didn't stop, eh? Oh, I wonder why. Oh, the racist. Oh, yeah. It's because you were Jewish, or or whatever it is, because I'm Jewish or whatever. Right. That's not going to help us.
Right.
So running aground on reality is eventually going to happen. My big fear is the drift that occurs in the meantime. So without saying anything, my friend Spencer Clavin gave a very, very erudite and clear explanation of how he reconciles his homosexuality with his Christianity. He did. I'm not going to say he's right.
Is that when he was on with his father, that little video? Is that what you're referring to? Yeah, I watched it.
It was he did I'm referring to a podcast. They may have made a video of it. I don't know about the video. Okay. I heard it on a podcast, but it's very likely the same explanation. And I don't want to get on to focusing too much on this topic as much as I want to use the topic to illustrate what postmodernism can do. So Spencer's not postmodern. If you notice the way that he did it, he had an explanation of how the Greek functioned. He had an explanation of how the meaning functioned. He had an explanation of his own experience, but he didn't avail himself of the tools of cynicism and of suspicious hermeneutics. He didn't avail himself of the social constructivist explanations of sexuality. He didn't avail himself of any of that. Okay. If you go back to 2006, Brian McLaren was saying, hey, we need to have a moratorium on discussions about homosexuality for 5 years so we can figure out what we think. Now, when he said that 5 years ago, I was just like, I know where this goes. Today, Robin Henderson Espinoza, who takes, according to her Instagram count, mid-range doses of various hormones in order to go deeper into a non-binary transgendered identity and being, and who thinks that the entirety of Christianity post-Constantine is an empire theology, was recently with Brian McLaren at a thing called Called to Be Prophets. We started out wondering, is homosexuality a sin? And we ended up swallowing all of queer theory in its entirety. Now, I'm not making a comment there about homosexuality. What I am saying is, if you're using careful tools, you could wind up at either the kind of Owen Strahan, John Piper camp on homosexuality, or you could wind up with Spencer Clavin. You could wind up with either of those. Most of the theologians, I admit, are Piper, but you could get up with Clavin. You need postmodernism to wind up with taking in all of queer theory. There's no sliding point and there's no stopping point when it comes to postmodernism. Nothing is off the table. You could go in all directions. And here's the thing, they're okay with that. Because once you've taken it on, you don't worry about leaving where you were, because where you were was never where you were supposed to be. That's why when they say, well, he's deconstructing, I go, oh man, you guys have no idea what you're bringing in, do you? Because when they're saying, or when I say, look, man, you're using deconstruction, you're using postmodernism. Early on, when I called Kristen on her postmodernism, she blocked me on Twitter that I started doing a thread on her, and she commented on it. And I was just like, hey, you blocked me. Now you've unblocked me to read my thread. That's not fair. So then we had an interaction, and she was trying to tell me to read James K. Smith on postmodernism. I'm just like, you're using deconstruction. And Karen Swallows Pryor showed up and says, well, that's not what she means by deconstruction. I sat there and I was like, man, you guys really don't understand, or you don't know, or you can't grasp that deconstruction, well, it's a difference between what's going on out there, the colloquial sense of deconstruction and the technical sense of deconstruction. Well, there's two technical senses of deconstruction, whether you're dealing with the Derridians like Bennington or the Yale School, as it might be called, whether you're dealing with the philosophers of the literary tradition, how they construe deconstruction. There might be two schools of technical deconstruction in the Derridian sense. Ask Nicholas Royale, he'll probably sort it out for you. But the more important point here is that memeified form of deconstruction, that colloquial sense of deconstruction, is deeply tied to the original Derridian model. In the same way that when people say the grandma who is illiterate and is 90 years old and just says, I just love my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and I listen to the sermon. That woman probably has never read Augustine. She's probably never read Calvin, but boy, the faith that she's pulling from is pulling from that. It is, not everyone operates at level 1 with the technical distinctions in mind. When most people, I lost a nephew. When that happened, I didn't say, I didn't deal with that pain through an understanding of a Leibnizian theodicy to reconcile. I didn't sit there and think, this is the best of all possible worlds. Like, that's not what happens. That's not what it goes.
Right.
What's happening is you are seeing the philosophy, the technical philosophy, the intellectual DNA as the seed. Most people are just eating the fruit. And the fruit is the memeified version. It's a partial version of the seed. It's the thing that everyone eats. Okay? The intellectual constructions of the Greek happen at level 1. The people in community discussing and encouraging each other in Christ when someone dies, that's level 2. And postmodernism at level 1 will give you nihilism at level 2. And my suggestion for us today is that all of these intellectual things get memeified. And I know that Kristen is going to say in her book, well, I'm just looking at the fruit of evangelicalism. selectively picking certain fruit of evangelicalism and using it to tar the whole thing is not the same as looking at what is the fruit of this theology and what is the fruit of this worldview. That's the first point. The second point on top of that is the attempt to deny that they've engaged in a worldview with the new book by what's his name? Who's doing the one on worldview apologetics? I can't remember what it's called at the moment. I don't have a worldview. Of course you don't. Right? This is so when Karen Swallows Priors come in and say, well, you're misconstruing deconstruction, I'm like, no. The colloquial deconstructive term is deeply tied to the Foucaultian deconstruction and the Derridian deconstruction. I mean that in the same way I mean it when I say that, Mother Teresa giving bread and cheese to people who have nothing is deeply tied to her understanding of who Christ is. Though both of those things are deeply tied to the intellectual roots. And these postmoderns these people who have drank the postmodern, who still think they're operating at the level of mastery, don't see that. You can be blinded by your own feeling of mastery to the point where you say, I have mastery, these things are falling apart. Well, good, they should have fallen apart. If they couldn't withstand the deconstruction, they needed to go, not realizing that everything gets torn apart. And so when I watch these people, when I watch the deconstructionists, especially the Christians, operate, and they think that they can avoid this. They insist that they can avoid this. They really believe that they're going to be able to continue with some kind of Christianity. Derrida thought he could. Derrida gave an interview in 1988 where he said, I have no will to see deconstruction be used to just tear things apart. He wasn't operating on that level. He didn't want that. But this is a necessary, it follows from it. It's not a slippery slope. It's a logical consequence if you follow it to its logical conclusion. I mean, in the 80s, they kind of did that, but then it was brought back in other forms through race scholarship. And they think that if they, well, I am queer, I am Black, and I have an undeconstructible identity. The people who are coming after you are going to deconstruct that identity too. In the same way that you treat the old guard who said that the postmodernism will rot everything away, that you treat them like the cranky old uncle, you still kind of like him, but they're the cranky old uncle. You're going to become the cranky old aunt that's holding on to the Westminster Confession. And what they're going to say to you, as I would say to God is Gray, the YouTuber, I would say, when they say, I have a high view, I love scripture.
That's what I found.
You are tied. Yeah. You are tied to the scriptures through your emotions and your emotional connection to them. But the next generation's not going to be raised with that.
No.
And what will tie them to the scriptures?
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. But we have to land the plane. We're 2.5 hours into this puppy, which is,
are we?
Which is long even for me.
This is, well, I come from Ben Boyce world where we do 3 hours. So we can hit the stop button whenever you want.
Well, I'm glad we had this. It gives me obviously 2.5 hours gives me a much better understanding of who you are, what your mission is, what you care about, what you love. And I'll be very interested to see what the little community of communities that I sort of inhabit in this world thinks of this conversation. I expect that some will be very excited and appreciative. Others are going to, they're not because they're postmoderns, but because it's going to be interesting.
Others will be not so appreciative. Did you say? My earphones cut out. My earbuds cut out when you. So I lost you.
See how long we've gone? We outlasted the batteries.
Oh no. Yeah.
Well, others will have other critiques because at some point you have to lay down the apples and the oranges in the food fight and get busy building the life, because it's finally the life that is it's finally the life that counts.
Yeah. Can I show you something?
Sure.
This is a Boss DM2 delay.
For a guitar, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a delay pedal.
Yeah.
It's missing this knob because we had to take it off because one of the capacitors inside broke. It's now, this used to be a knob that we could set longer or shorter delay time. So we could make it either go, if I hit a D string and say, da, it would go either da, 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 or da, 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 however we wanted along.
Yeah.
However, but it doesn't work. So my friend set it at 90 milliseconds. So it just gives kind of an echoey sound, like a reverb, like you're playing in an old cathedral or something.
Yeah.
This sits on my board. Somebody years ago, these became extremely expensive in perfect working order because people thought you can't get the Boss DM2 anymore. You can't make them, and they don't make them like they used to. They're imbued with special powers, right? You can't get the chips anymore.
Yeah.
That's part of the sound. It was accidental. They stumbled across it. I also have this. This is the Wazacraft reissue of the Boss DM2. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Guitar players for a very long time would say, well, the new ones aren't as good as the old ones. They have special powers. That's an example of something, this old version here, having attributes caked onto it that don't exist. That might be the kind of thing that you would want to deconstruct, but you wouldn't want to use deconstruction to do it. The way you'd want to get off that caked off, kind of incorrectly attributed or attributed power to this pedal, and to say, look, this pedal's just as good. No, it's got to be the old one. Well, the way that they did that is a couple of guys. It started with a guy who owned a company called Visual Sound, who with a different type of pedal said, look, the old ones are just the same as the new ones, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to put them both into the same amplifier and switch back and forth between them. And we're going to have you guys on the other side so you can't see which one is which, and we're going to have you tell us which one is which. And if you can't do it, they're the same, which they turn out to be. We have really brilliant engineers. This pedal is built by brilliant people. They know how to recreate this. We can go to the moon. We can recreate this. You know why this pedal still sits on my board, even though I have this, and I have another reverb, and I have other delays? You know why this sits on this board? It was my dad's. My father was run out of a church for wanting. My dad had me when he was quite old. So my dad is quite old now. And because he wanted to have these. And my father was on stage and a woman kept saying, turn down the guitar, turn down the guitar. And she pointed at him to turn it down. My dad held up the cord. His guitar wasn't plugged in. Wasn't plugged in. I have this on my board because it belonged to my father. That's important and it matters. I don't want to analyze this pedal through its having belonged to my father and his social position, nor do I want to toss aside the value of having my father's guitar sound be part of mine, because that's meaningful. It's a nod to him that I can still do some of the things that he does. And people will say, when some of the older generation shows up at church and I play, you play like your dad. And I do. I learned from him, but I didn't stop with him. Right? That's why we have to go buy this one. We have to get the new, we can't stop. I can't sit forever with, I love this pedal because of the sound that it gives and the fact that it was my dad's, but I can't stop there. I can't cease and just camp and say there's nothing new. No, there's all kinds of new sounds that are coming out and all kinds of new things that we need to be able to move on with. I have a 1965 Gibson Firebird with pickups out of a 1971 Les Paul Gold Top. You know what the guitar I actually use is an Epiphone Flying V, right? Which is a new guitar, because back when all those classic records were made, you know, they say, man, look, Jimi Hendrix, this classic 65. Well, it wasn't a classic guitar when he got it. It was brand new, right? Fender was giving him the brand new thing. We don't want to have a decisive break with our history. We don't want to do that. There was an article years ago I want to say it was in the Atlantic where a guy talked about how post-modernity ushers in a decisive break and we unmoor ourselves from our history. We don't want to do that, but we also don't want to be stuck imbuing special powers into old pedals. Right? I don't want to be stuck in nothing can ever sound like this, and then diminishing the ability of the engineers to make me this because I really like this. I resisted getting this because I didn't want to have the new one. I don't want to put the new wine in the old wineskins. I don't want to do that, but at the same time, I don't want to delegitimize those old wineskins and the wine that they brought forth.
Yep.
I want to continue our tradition without getting stuck on things.
Yep.
And I think we can do that without having to use the methods of deconstruction.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
The Christian version of saying, we're going to plug this one in and plug this one in and put them to the same settings and see if you can tell the difference. And I think what we can do is we can say, look, we're going to take the theology that we have, that we get from stained glass windows, and we can make techno music or something else. Or we can have our theology of family, and it looks a certain way in one context, and it might get cashed out differently in another context without losing the essence and the substance that's contained therein. The thing that's, this will take off the dirties, the thing that's present. We want the presence.
We want the presence.
That's right. We want the metaphysics of presence because we want
you, my friend, are a Protestant. Well, we gotta land the plane here, my friend. We have to land the plane.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for your time. And I'll probably post this weekend or next week. And I'll edit out your name that appeared at that one point. And I'm gonna make a little teaser from a little point where I thought you spoke who you were. And I'm going to put that at the front like I did with Peugeot, my recent conversation with Peugeot. And I appreciate your time and thanks for coming on. And I am very interested to see how the little communities around me respond to this. So
I'm always interested to see how people respond to this. Do you have a minute after you're done recording?
Sure. I'll end the recording.